I've said, I think in the second lecture in this section, that variables are one of the most important aspects of any programming language. And in this video, I think I'm going to cover the second most important thing, and that is if statements. If statements are sort of controlling the flow of your program. So remember before when I gave an example of a video game, which you would have a character that would have 100 health, and when they got hit, their health would be decreased. Let's just say let HP is equal to 100. So, okay, so when you get hit, you might lose however strong the bullet was. You might lose 10 points, you might lose 50 points, whatever. So, but you want to do something when your health gets below 0. So the only way that you could do that is with an if statement. You would just say, in the last video we saw greater than or equal than, greater than or less than, or we saw those types of things. We saw how to use that. So basically you would just ask JavaScript, is health less than or equal to 0? And if it is, do something. End the game, respawn your person, whatever you wanted to do, you would have to do something based off the player's health. And you could do that just like this. If these parentheses, and inside the parentheses is what you want to check for. So in this case, you want to say if health is greater than, less than or equal to 0. And then you put two of these things, the curly braces. Then you go back one, you press enter. Then your code inside here will, okay, I'm sort of getting messed up with the indentation here. That's just how this environment works. Anyways, the code you write right here will run only if the player's health is less than or equal to 0. So let's run this. Let's see what happens. Okay, so nothing happened. Let's make HP equal to 0. Let's just make it equal to 0. We don't have to subtract anything. Let's just make it equal to 0. Let's see what happens now. So now it says game over. Okay, so, and we also saw in the last video that this on its own gets reduced to, let's get out of here. This is an expression that gets reduced to one value. That value is true, which if statements only really check if a value is true or not. So, and you could actually do this too. You could just say if true. Now at this point, we're not actually checking the player's health. We're just automatically doing this. This is never going to fail because true is always going to be true. But I just want to illustrate that if statements have to take your value and reduce it to a true or false value. Then if the value is true, it runs the code, and if it's not true, then it doesn't run the code. All right, let's do this again. Game over. Okay, sweet. Now, another thing that you could do with if statements is an else statement. So else just comes after the if statement. You just say else, and you don't have to put your space, but I like to put my space. You could do this if you want. Whoops. And you just do that. I want to put the spaces back. So, as you can imagine, if your if statement isn't true, then the else code will run. So you're saying, if the player's health is less than or equal to 0, do this, and if not, do this. So now, whenever you get here, one of these will always run. It has to. Because again, the Boolean could only be true or false. So this statement is either going to get resolved to true or it's not. There's no third value that it could be. So whenever you run an if statement and an else statement, one of these codes will always run. Either this will run or this will run, but it's impossible for neither of them to run. So here it says game over. Let's get rid of this. And it just says keep playing. And if you make HP is equal to HP minus, whoops, not that much, minus 45. It just says keep playing. And you could also say keep playing, player health is equal to, you want a space there? Actually, I'm not going to put a space there just because I want to show you what it will look like without it. So keep playing, player health is equal to 55. And you see how the 2 and the 55, there's no space there, because it's just taking your value of HP and it's just like putting it right here, right after that. So you want to have a space first. Okay, another thing that you could do, which isn't used as much, just because doing this could create some messy code, and usually if you have to do this too much, there's maybe a better way to do what you're trying to do. But you could do else if statements. So an else if statement is just like saying, if this, then do that, or if this is true, do this. If it's not true and this is true, then do this. And if that's not true, then, so it's like it's checking something if it's true, and if it's not, it just goes down and checks something else. So instead of just saying, else do this no matter what, you're saying another if statement. So you could say else if HP is less than or equal to 20. Player, you could say something like player is low on health. So nothing happened here because the player's health is at 55 and there's no else statement. So let's put the else statement back. So keep playing, and let's make it 85. So now it just checks if player's health is less than or equal to 0, and it's not. And then it checks if it's less than or equal to 20, and it is. So then it stops there. So the thing here is that this code down here isn't going to run if the first one runs. If the first one runs, then it doesn't even check any of this. So if you flip these around, these if statements around, if at first you checked if the player's health was less than 20, and then you checked if it was less than, actually I'll show you. If it's less than or equal to 20 here, now there's going to be a bit of a problem. Because even if the player is low on health, even if the player has less than 0 health, it's still going to just say the player is low on health. So let's subtract 185, click run, it says player is low on health. Even though this is true, the player's health is less than 0, it's not getting there because it just checks the first thing first, and then if that's true, it leaves this if else sequence. Okay, so the order really does matter. Let's flip these around. I could just go back. Now it's going to say, okay, still says, oh, right. So now it's going to say game over because the player's health is minus 85. And you could make this go as deep as you want. You can put another if statement, and you can put another else if. You put another one. And this is why I said at the beginning that else if isn't used as much, because if you ever had a code that looked like this, it's just too messy. There's probably a better way to do what you want to do. And you could check if it's less than or equal to 50, 60, a bunch of different values, whatever you wanted. Anyways, let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this. Okay, and one more thing. So the last thing I want to talk about here is actually really important for JavaScript. It is the concept of truthy and falsy values. So let's do this actually. Let's go back to a string. And let's say if name console.log truthy else console.log falsy. So this is going to check if what you put in here is truthy or not. So if you click run, it's going to say truthy. So this value is truthy. Let's just try J. It's truthy. Let's try an empty string. It's falsy. So falsy is a value that JavaScript just determines is falsy, is false, because name isn't a Boolean. So it needs to reduce this value to either true or false. And since you're not checking if something is greater than something else, or checking if it's equal to something, you're not really doing anything here. You're just putting name. So it just puts like an empty string. This is the same thing. It's still going to be falsy. Because when you put name here, and name is equal to an empty string, that's the same thing as just putting an empty string, because that's what name is equal to. So JavaScript basically has these rules which determines what's true and false when you're not actually doing anything, when you're not making a checking if it's greater or doing whatever. There's nothing here. So okay, so how does JavaScript determine what's truth or falsy? Well, it basically just is built into the language. So any empty string is falsy. So since this is an empty string, actually this isn't, this should be name again. So any empty string is falsy, and if a string isn't empty, it's automatically truthy. So it doesn't matter what's there, even if you put false, that's still truthy. Okay, so what else is false? What is false? I'm going to put them here because it's kind of important. Well, the value of false is obviously false. This is a Boolean value, so of course it's false. It's set to false. So that's falsy. What else? Empty strings. Empty strings are falsy. We already saw that. Let's see what else. 0. 0 is falsy. Falsy. And actually there's also -0, which doesn't really make sense, but it's a thing. Any other number is truthy. 5. And also a negative number is also truthy. So what else is falsy? There is NaN, which you're not really going to see this very much. You'll usually see this if you try to do a math operation or a math function with something that isn't a number, and then it'll just return not a number just because it wasn't able to. That's what NaN is. It means not a number. So anyways, so NaN is falsy. Let's try that. Falsy. Also null. Null is falsy. Null just means that what you're accessing, a variable, it just has no value. Falsy. And the last one is undefined. Whoops. So undefined actually is different than null, because null just means that you haven't actually defined something yet. They're very subtle differences, but I'll show you this. If you check name here, basically at this point name, actually I can console.log it. Let's see type of name, and it will tell me the type of name. So let's get rid of this. So you can see name doesn't have a type, it's just undefined. So that's where you would see undefined, because it's kind of common to declare variables just like this, and then later on in your code you could set it to something else. You just say name is equal to, and now when we console.log type of, it's going to say string. And I actually did this twice. That's why the first time it was undefined. Okay, so that's what falsey is. So if any value gets reduced to false, if it's an empty string, if it's 0, if it's nan, if it's null or undefined, it's falsey, and it will fail an if statement. Basically everything else is true. So there's no list of things that are true. It's just everything else. It's an infinite amount of things. Like you could, just for example, make this equal to anything you want, and as long as this value doesn't fall under any of these, it's true. Okay, and with that, I'm going to end the video.